Hey guys, tonight we're taking a long, sleepy stroll through the flickering twilight of ancient Mesopotamia. The sun's barely dipped below the horizon, but already you can feel the buzz, soft sandals pattering down dusty roads, reed doors swinging open, and warm lamps glowing behind lattice windows. There's music somewhere, pipes maybe, and the scent of something sharp and yeasty wafts from behind a corner wall. Someone's laughing, someone else is snoring, and somewhere not far off, someone's spilling a little too much frothy beer onto a clay counter and not even pretending to clean it up. You step carefully over uneven cobbles as you make your way past the open-air stalls where lentils steam and charred fish pop and sizzle. It's almost easy to forget you're walking through one of the oldest cities in the world, but you are. This is Babylon, or maybe Uruk, or Lagash. Doesn't matter, because in every corner of this ancient, river-wrapped civilization, there's one common denominator lighting up the night: the tavern. And just so you know, Mesopotamian cities didn't mess around with their nightlife. These folks had legal drinking codes, dedicated beer goddesses, and entire professions devoted to getting you delightfully buzzed. Responsibly, of course. You're stepping into the birthplace of happy hour. Also, minor side note, if you actually lived here, you probably wouldn't survive more than a week. Beer was everywhere, but so were parasites, imperial taxes, and the occasional ankle-deep flood of mystery sludge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I want to know who else is up late tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk a little farther, deeper into the maze of clay brick walls and reed thatch awnings. The air smells of warm grain, river mud, and that slightly sour-sweet scent that only comes from fermentation in heat. In one small courtyard, you pass a man singing, badly, to a goat. He's holding a jug and seems very sure he's the next in Hedwana, which is bold, considering she was the first named poet in history and also didn't bleat between verses. This isn't just some modern-style Friday night buzz. For ancient Mesopotamians, beer was woven into every part of daily life. It was nutrition, it was religion, it was economy, and, let's be honest, it was also how people coped with living in a world where crops could fail, rivers could betray you, and your neighbors might stab you over a cow. And the tavern? That was ground zero. Not just for drinking, but for scheming, socializing, and occasionally committing petty crimes. Some scholars argue that taverns were even central to women's economic independence in Sumer, because they often ran these establishments themselves. Others disagree, saying the ownership evidence is patchy, at best. Historians still argue whether taverns were truly egalitarian spaces, or more like glorified holding pens for the lower classes. You duck under a low arch and step into one now. No need to knock. The inside glows orange, the floor is packed mud, and people are squeezed elbow to elbow on woven mats and rough benches. A jug of beer, lukewarm and possibly chunkier than you'd prefer, is passed around the group. There are no glasses, just a large shared vessel with several straws sticking out, each made of hollow reeds. It's like an ancient group cocktail, minus the little umbrellas and plus a very real risk of contracting roundworms. Beer in Mesopotamia wasn't exactly what you'd find in your fridge today. It was thick, more like porridge than pilsner, and unfiltered, made from fermented barley or emmer wheat. Sometimes it was flavored with dates, herbs, or honey, though it's likely that most of the time it just tasted earthy, like soggy crackers and regrets. You lean back against the cool wall and let the buzz of chatter settle over you. People are talking about everything: trade prices, temple gossip, some guy named Lugal who lost all his sheep and blames the moon. There's a game happening in the corner that looks suspiciously like a cross between dice and interpretive dance. You don't ask. In the far corner of the tavern sits a man scribbling on a clay tablet. He's not an accountant, he's a bureaucrat. probably recording how much beer was dispensed today, to whom, and whether they were rations or purchases. You see, beer wasn't just a pleasure here, it was a paycheck. Laborers were often paid in beer instead of money, especially those working on public projects, like irrigation canals or temple maintenance. A decent day's work might earn you 2 to 5 liters of beer. Not bad, depending on your tolerance and liver strength. A fringe theory even suggests that beer distribution may have been one of the earliest examples of proto-socialism, with the temple complex functioning like a state-run brewery/food bank. Most historians scoff at this. It's hard to call something socialism when half the population were enslaved or indentured. But the beer for work model was real, and honestly, it's still more efficient than whatever your boss is doing with spreadsheets. Suddenly the room quiets. An old woman enters, stooped, sharp-eyed, and carrying a jug twice her size. Everyone makes space. She doesn't speak, but pours a bit of her brew into a shallow cup, hands it to the nearest drinker, and watches him taste. He nods once. Everyone exhales. This is the brewmistress, or alewife, and yes, she runs the place. You blink, and the firelight flickers. Outside, the sounds of the city still hum. Crickets, a soft splash from a nearby canal, the occasional hiccup. It's night now. Deep night. Somewhere nearby, a ziggurat glows faintly with oil lamps. Then Kasi, patron of beer, fermentation, and a good time. You sip from the clay mug past you. It's warm. It's weirdly chewy. But it's real. The kind of drink that tastes like it has a story. And tonight, you're here to hear it all. You blink again, and suddenly you're not in the tavern anymore. You're standing beside a sun-scorched field, early morning fog still clinging to the canals like ghosts who haven't had their caffeine yet. A pair of oxen trudges by, pulling a cart loaded with sacks of barley that look like they've been through an apocalypse. A couple of wide-eyed kids run alongside the cart, chasing a frog and yelling something unintelligible but enthusiastic. This is where it all starts. Mud, grain, and just enough water to ruin someone's afternoon if they're not careful. The early Mesopotamians didn't set out to invent beer. They were probably just trying to survive the Neolithic version of a grocery crisis. You've got too much barley, a damp storeroom, and no refrigeration. Leave it long enough, and boom. You've got a sloppy mess that smells funky and makes your cousin laugh uncontrollably before passing out. Most likely, it started as accidental fermentation. Leftover bread or grain porridge left in the sun mixed with airborne yeasts. No one had a PhD in microbiology, but they noticed that the goo made you feel weird, warm, maybe even happy. And when you're living in a world where snakes can crawl into your sandals and every third week is a flood warning, a little happy goes a long way. You crouch down and pick up a few grains of barley from the cracked earth. They look innocent, but these are the seeds of a revolution. Literally. The domestication of barley and emmer wheat didn't just feed people, it gave rise to civilization. Agriculture meant permanent settlements, which meant communal food storage, which meant spoilage. And when you spoil enough grain, you get two things: mold and beer. One of those is significantly more fun. Historians still argue whether beer preceded bread or vice versa. Some fringe archaeologists suggest that beer may have been the real motivation behind early grain cultivation. In other words, humanity didn't settle down to bake loaves, they stayed to get buzzed. Sounds insane, until you realize how often we've chosen comfort over practicality in history. Remember when someone invented the corset for antibiotics? You step out of the field and into an early brewery. Well, brewery is a generous term. It's basically a shaded area with a few clay pots, reed baskets, and a woman in a linen wrap who looks like she's one spatula away from yelling at her teenage son. She's soaking crushed grain in water, straining it through reed mats, and humming a tune that'll still be familiar 3,000 years later when Homer's hangover kicks in. She's making a kind of mash, then leaving it to ferment naturally, thanks to wild yeast hanging out in the warm open air like it owns the place. The result is a drink called kos, a slightly sour, nutrient-rich slurry that's more like liquid bread than anything you'd find in a bar today. No carbonation, no hops, no delicate hints of citrus zest, just pure, muddy, primordial buzz juice. You're handed a long straw. It's got a filter at the end, made from straw or bronze, to keep out the grain husks and whatever bugs decided to take a bath in there. You sip. It's not bad. Thick, yes, but filling, and surprisingly low in alcohol, probably around 2 to 3%. Enough to take the edge off without turning your daily drink into an emergency nap. You look around and realize you're surrounded by workers, men and women both, in sweaty linen, laughing and drinking communally. This isn't a luxury beverage, it's a dietary staple. In some Mesopotamian cities, beer made up almost a third of daily caloric intake. That's not just partying, that's survival. And hey, better buzz than dead from a sketchy water source. Children drank it too, though probably the weaker stuff. Everyone did. There were even different kinds for different social levels. A basic worker's beer might be called black beer, thick and strong. There were lighter versions, for ritual use, and sweeter ones infused with dates for celebrations. It's unclear if they had names like Paleolithic or Barley and Sons, but we can dream. A clay tablet from the city of Uruk, dated around 3300 BCE, shows pictograms of beer production. And this isn't just a doodle. This is arguably the oldest known written recipe in the world. A step-by-step brewing guide carved into a clay slab. Forget cookbooks. These people were immortalizing their drink instructions in stone. You don't do that unless the beer really matters. By the way, side note, imagine future archaeologists digging up a TikTok on how to make espresso martinis and treating it like holy scripture. That's basically what we're doing now with this 5,000-year-old beer how-to. You wander out of the brewery just as the sun begins to bake the horizon. In the distance, tall reeds rustle by the canals, frogs croak a warning about incoming heat, and the smell of damp grain lingers in your nostrils. You glance down at your hands, now dusted in flour and wort. The day's just beginning, but already the beer's working its magic. The edges of the world feel softer, a little slower, like your mind is riding in a very gentle canoe made of soft fabric and fog. The workers sing as they march off to irrigation fields, each of them carrying their daily ration jug like it's an extension of their soul. You take another sip and realize something strange. This isn't just history. This is still us. Just sandier and slightly more sober. The late afternoon sun now glints across the canal like liquid bronze, and the warm buzz of fermented barley still tingles gently in your chest. You follow the gentle rhythm of footsteps and chants toward a temple courtyard, where something a little more sacred, though just as frothy, is underway. Because in ancient Mesopotamia, beer wasn't just food or fun. It was also divine. You arrive just as a group of temple singers begins a slow, steady chant in Sumerian. Their voices rise in haunting harmony, echoing off mud brick walls. In the center of the group, an older priestess steps forward, holding a small cup of beer aloft. Her head is shaved in the traditional style, her robe dusted with flour and ash. She's not just a brewer. She's a vessel, a living embodiment of one of the most iconic deities you've never heard of, Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. Ninkasi wasn't just some background deity stashed in the divine pantry. She had status. Her origin story was written down in a hymn, the Hymn to Ninkasi, one part praise poem, one part homebrew recipe. Like if Psalm 23 also taught you how to make kombucha. The hymn goes into beautiful, almost sensual detail. You are the one who waters the malt set on the ground. You are the one who bakes the bapir in the big oven. And yes, bapir was a twice-baked bread used specifically for brewing, not for snacking. You dunk it in water, mash it with dates or honey, let it ferment, and voila, sacrament in a jug. Scholars are still debating whether the hymn to Ninkasi was mainly instructional or ceremonial. Some believe it was part of a priestess's daily chant, guiding her through the sacred steps of brewing like a divine checklist. Others think it was recited during festivals, when the beer was finally ready and the city could erupt in some serious, state-approved revelry. Either way, Nkasi wasn't just about buzzed evenings and clinking cups. She represented order in the chaos. The transformation of raw grain into something civilized, consumable, even spiritual. You could say she brewed both beer and culture in the same clay pot. And don't think for a second she was alone. Up there on the divine drinks team. Mesopotamian mythology was basically a party guest list with heavy symbolism. There's Dumuzi, the shepherd god who, spoiler, dies and resurrects annually, often in a story involving excessive feasting and intoxication. There's Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water, who may or may not be the type to show up to the god's banquet already tipsy. In one story, he gets drunk, gives away sacred power. This is the Yukor, the sacred storage space. The beer here is no ordinary brew. It's been blessed, strained thrice, and probably seen more prayers than some modern marriages. It will be poured as libation, offered to the gods, ancestors, and maybe even a helpful household spirit or two. You watch as a young priest delicately tips a jug into a shallow bowl, the liquid swirling with honeyed darkness. He sets it at the feet of a clay statue, Nkasi herself, carved with a serene smile and a mug in each hand. If you didn't know better, you'd swear she was smirking at you. And here's where things get delightfully weird. Some scholars believe beer offerings weren't just symbolic. They were consumed by the gods. Not literally, of course, but ritually, left to evaporate or absorbed by priests acting as divine intermediaries. In some rare cases, animals were given beer as offerings themselves. Archaeological digs have uncovered donkey burials with tiny beer vessels, as if even the afterlife had a happy hour. Now, not everyone agreed on exactly how beer functioned in divine relationships. Some Mesopotamian texts portray it as a bridge between worlds. Others see it as a reward, heaven's cocktail hour. And then there's that one theory, more fringe than mainstream, suggesting the gods themselves were invented during drunken hallucinations, under the hot sun. We're not saying beer invented religion, but you can kind of taste the logic. Outside, the festival is picking up. Dancers whirl in the square. Music spills from reed flutes and hand drums. There's food, fire, and most definitely, flirting. You linger near a bench, watching as couples pass jugs back and forth, laughing, their fingers stained with date syrup. You wonder how many relationships began this way, under flickering torchlight, cheeks warm with beer and mythology. You sip again from a shared vessel. It's sweeter than the one in the tavern. The date infusion lingers on your tongue, rich and earthy. You close your eyes. The hymn echoes faintly in your ears, layered with the scent of smoke, barley, and the fading heat of day. And just like that, you get it. You understand why they sang, why they built statues, temples, whole cults around this murky drink. Beer wasn't just a beverage. It was a spell, a little jar of transformation. Grain into gold, mundane into magical, noise into ritual. You open your eyes. The festival is swirling around you now, like a dream, soft and half-formed. In the distance, someone calls out the name of a friend, or a god, or maybe just the last person who promised to pay for this round. It doesn't matter. All you know is this. The beer is flowing, the music is playing, and somewhere above it all, Nkasi is raising a mug right back at you. The music fades slowly behind you, replaced by the rhythmic scuff of your sandals on stone. You're walking uphill now, towards something looming against the indigo sky. It's massive, impossible so. Step by step, your eyes follow it upward. Stacked platforms, tiered like a layer cake baked by someone with very big dreams and very few OSHA regulations. This is a ziggurat, and it towers over the city like a god watching its own Netflix documentary. You're not here to climb all the way to the top. Though the priests do that daily, usually while fasting and barefoot. No, you're here for something more grounded. The party under the ziggurat. The one that's not supposed to be happening and yet absolutely always is. You find it tucked beside a cluster of storage buildings. The glow of torches flickers on mud brick walls. Laughter drifts through the air, thick with smoke and that unmistakable scent of overly warm beer. A small crowd is gathered. Merchants, scribes, farmers, maybe a couple of bored temple guards who are definitely off duty. A jug passes hands, then another, and another. You step into the circle just as someone finishes telling a joke that involves a goat, a tax receipt, and an unfortunate misunderstanding involving a reed basket. It's hard to follow, but the punchline lands and everyone howls, except one man who groans, clutches his head, and mutters something that might translate loosely to, "By Enlil's beard, I shouldn't have mixed the dark beer." And now we arrive at an important question. Did ancient priests get drunk? The short answer, oh, absolutely. But here's the thing, it wasn't always frowned upon. In many cases, it was expected. Religious rituals often involved beer as a sacred offering, and priests frequently partook of the goods. In fact, some of the most lavish feasts in Mesopotamian temples weren't just for the gods, they were also for the priesthood and their VIP guests. These events blurred the line between ceremony and celebration. You'd have chants, sacrifices, prayers, and also toasts, gossip, and the occasional regrettable flirtation with someone from the acolyte choir. There are temple records that list entire inventories of grain and beer allocated specifically for festive consumption. That's official speak for yes, we budgeted for everyone to get a little loose. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were spiritual experiences or thinly veiled drinkathons blessed with incense. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, like a priest passed out next to the altar with a clay mug still in hand. You're handed one now, a thick, squat vessel warm from the torchlight. You sip. It's smoother than the others, maybe better filtered. You're told it came from the ziggurat stores, which makes sense. Temple beer was considered the good stuff, made from higher quality grain, brewed in larger quantities, and reserved for divine service, which somehow always included the upper priesthood's personal consumption. A few steps away, someone starts singing. Not a hymn this time, but a drinking song. The lyrics are mostly nonsense syllables that rhyme poorly with Enkidu, but it doesn't matter. Everyone joins in. This is the after-ritual buzz, when the lines between worship and wilding out get a little blurry. You sit down on a stone bench. Next to you, an elderly man with a long, oiled beard leans over and whispers, "Back when I was young, temple festivals lasted 3 days." He grins, revealing exactly 2 teeth. "We used to drink until we forgot the names of our own gods," he cackles. You're not sure whether to laugh or worry. And here's a fun tidbit for you. One Sumerian proverb advises, "A beer-drinking man has no worries." Another warns, "Don't show up to the palace drunk, it will not go well." So, mixed signals, very on-brand for ancient bureaucracy. In fact, some priests took their brewing so seriously, they incorporated it into training. Archaeological records suggest that young acolytes were taught to recite brewing methods alongside prayers. One inscription even details the penalties for dishonoring sacred beer, which can include fines or forced labor. Imagine your barista getting excommunicated for over-foaming a latte. You stretch out your legs as the torches burn lower, casting shadows like soft brush strokes on the ancient walls. The ziggurat looms above, silent but not empty. Somewhere up there, offerings are still being made. A quiet murmur of prayer hums against the bricks, carried on the warm breeze. And below it all, the people drink. They always have. It wasn't just priests getting in on the divine pour either. Mesopotamian festivals often welcomed commoners to join in, though seating and beer quality probably depended on your social rank. The gods were generous, but not necessarily egalitarian. The party next to you erupts in laughter again. Someone's reenacting a myth about Inanna and the hulupu tree, using only interpretive dance and a goat skull. It's very moving. You're not sure what the message is, but the goat seems into it. Another jug arrives. Someone proposes a toast to Ninkasi and not getting smote tomorrow. You drink, and the liquid hits differently this time. Less bitter, more rounded. Either the priesthood really knows they're brewing, or you're finally developing a taste for barley porridge with a splash of hallucination. The night deepens, the torches burn low, the music slows. You sit back against the warm wall of the temple and look up at the stars. In a world full of chaos, where rivers flood, kings get overthrown, and crops fail, this moment feels like a small victory. Maybe that's what beer was always meant to be. Not just a drink, not just a ceremony, but a pause. A space carved out from the madness, where people could laugh, sing, forget their titles, and remember they were human. You close your eyes. Somewhere far above, on a stone platform halfway to the gods, the final cup is poured and the chant fades into the stars. Morning creeps back in like a nosy neighbor, soft, dusty, and absolutely not respecting your need for sleep. You're awake again, somehow upright, and walking through a quieter part of the city. The festival's behind you now, its music replaced by the more subdued clatter of daily business. But even in the calm, the beer is still with you. Not in your hand this time, but on the walls, in the clay, literally written into the infrastructure. You turn a corner and find yourself inside a small shop. There's no neon sign, no chalkboard menu, just a narrow room, shelves of tablets, and a woman who looks like she could outdrink half the ziggurat staff. She's not brewing, she's accounting. And you, my friend, are standing in the Sumerian equivalent of a dive bar meets ledger office. This is where the real magic of Mesopotamian beer lived. Cuneiform tablets. Rows upon rows of them, each one etched in sharp triangles, baked hard and immortal. They contain recipes, ration lists, payment slips, drinking permits, temple inventories, even complaints from people who clearly didn't get enough foam in their cup. Beer wasn't just drunk, it was documented. Every transaction, every payment, every distribution of grain or beer rations was pressed into clay by scribes who probably dreamed in wedge shapes. Some of the earliest examples of written language aren't about war or poetry. They're about how much beer you owed the temple guard for helping herd goats last Tuesday. You squat beside a dusty shelf and pick up a tablet. It's small, about the size of a modern phone, and on it is a list of names next to measurements of beer. You squint. One name appears 5 times, each entry larger than the last. Either that guy was a hard worker, or he had serious connections in the Brewmaster Guild. The system was precise. A silo was a standard liquid measurement, just under a liter. Workers were often allocated between 1 and 5 silas of beer per day, depending on their job, with higher rations for heavy labor. A canal digger might get 5 silas. A scribe, maybe 2. And yes, there was absolutely bureaucratic drama over this. A fringe theory suggests ration disputes were common enough to cause small riots, though the evidence is mostly speculative. Still, you can imagine a stone-faced worker yelling, "I dug 3 ditches. I deserve 1 more sila, Dumuzi." Historians still argue whether these beer rations constituted actual wages, or were just one part of a broader compensation system. Either way, the volume was significant. One study suggests that a single large temple might produce thousands of liters of beer per month. Chalkboard and ironic font sense, but in a practical way. Clay tablets list different kinds of beer, dark beer, light beer, sweet beer, export beer, yes, really, and one called Nindasisig, which might translate to something like premium beer, or maybe beer for people who think they're fancy. There were tokens used to track purchases, small carved clay pieces stamped with marks to represent quantities. They worked like receipts, or maybe like poker chips, if poker chips could get you drunk and accidentally married to someone's cousin. Even more interesting, archaeologists have discovered what look like early versions of coasters. Flat clay discs found near tavern ruins, often marked with the same cuneiform signs used on ration tablets. One theory suggests these were used to place under mugs, either as surface protectors or to indicate what kind of beer you were served. You're now imagining a Sumerian bartender yelling, "You ordered dark beer, not Temple Light, no swaps." The taverns themselves were often run by women. These weren't just barkeeps. They were known as sabatu, or alewives, and they held real authority. They managed stock, settled disputes, and occasionally got name-dropped in legal documents. If you crossed a sabatu, you weren't just getting cut off. You were getting reported to the city elders. One infamous tablet from the city of Sipar records a woman named Ninbara being fined for selling under-measured beer, basically a 2000 BCE version of short pouring the pint. The punishment? Payment in silver and a public shaming. You get the sense the local Yelp reviews were brutal. You take a seat on a stone bench near one such tavern, watching the early afternoon traffic shuffle past. There's a man with a donkey cart full of date cakes, a couple of teenagers arguing over a game of Royal Game of Ur, which seems less like a game and more like passive-aggressive bean throwing. Someone hawks fish wrapped in reeds. And in the middle of it all, another jug of beer changes hands, almost casually. It's so normal here, so ingrained. No big celebration, no divine ceremony, just daily life. And a drink that's older than your great everything. Beer was a utility, an economy, and a language. And you're finally starting to understand it fluently. You close your eyes for a second and picture it. The clink of clay mugs, the scratch of styluses on tablets, the quiet math of a sabatu balancing her inventory in her head. It's a system so old and so human, it feels almost like a memory. And somewhere in that memory, someone's yelling, "You call that a full sila?" The sky is a molten copper now, sunset melting over the rooftops. And the breeze carries something different. It's not the smoky tang of grilled fish or the sour musk of brewing mash. It's perfume. Lavender? No, probably some resinous local blend of frankincense and crushed myrrh bark. Because tonight, you're not headed to a dingy corner bar. You're going somewhere elevated. You follow a group of well-dressed women down a polished stone path. They wear linen robes dyed with indigo and ochre, rare pigments that whisper wealth. Their laughter rings like bells, subtle but sharp. They're not priestesses. They're business owners, brewers, alewives. And they are not to be underestimated. You duck under a carved lintel and step into their world. A larger, brighter tavern, roofed with carefully joined cedar beams and trimmed with carved reeds. Lamps line the walls. The floor is swept. The beer? Already poured, waiting in elegant jugs shaped like tulips. The alewife behind the counter locks eyes with you. She's older, with laugh lines that say she's heard every excuse and poured through most of them. She nods, barely, and you realize she's not just running a tavern, she's running a network. In ancient Mesopotamia, women didn't just serve beer, they dominated the brewing industry. As early as 4000 BCE, tablets refer to women overseeing production, managing staff, handling accounts, and crafting specialized blends. In Sumerian culture, brewing was an extension of household labor, and women were the undisputed masters of both. You're handed a mug, not a clumsy worker's jug, but a fine-lipped cup, its rim etched with a delicate symbol. It's a mark of the brewer, her personal sign, a promise that what you're about to sip isn't just a drink, it's her name, reputation, and maybe her family's survival. And yes, there were laws to back her up. The Code of Hammurabi, yes, that Hammurabi, mentions tavern keeping explicitly. Law 108 reads, "If a tavern keeper, feminine noun, does not accept grain as payment but demands silver, and the customer refuses, she shall be drowned." Okay, yikes. But also, that's how central taverns and alewives were to society. Codified, controlled, and deadly serious. Historians still argue whether these laws were meant to protect consumers, regulate taxation, or keep women from becoming too economically independent. Some claim the harsh penalties were a reaction to just how much influence female brewers actually had. After all, a well-run tavern was more than a booze hut. It was a power center. Information flowed there. Deals were struck. Lovers met. Spies listened. You take a sip. It's smoother than any brew you've had yet. Thinner, clearer, with the faint tang of honey and something herbal. Mint? Thyme? It hits with a warmth that spreads like soft wool across your shoulders. The alewife watches you without smiling, just evaluating. She knows. You're not from here. A younger woman walks in, carrying a basket of tokens, clay markers stamped with different beer types and quantities. She's learning the trade, and the older woman gestures for her to come help measure out the next round. They don't use scales. They use muscle memory, instinct, and eyes trained over years. This is how it worked. Beer was currency, and alewives were both bartenders and bankers. They distributed daily rations, mediated disputes, and occasionally got caught up in legal drama when someone tried to skip out on a debt. Records show women being sued over short measures, disputed contracts, and unauthorized recipe tweaks. It wasn't just barley and water. It was business. And it's important to note, brewing wasn't considered lowly. In fact, the best brewers, almost always women, were respected. A well-run tavern could support an entire household, even elevate its social standing. In some regions, widows who lost their husbands could support themselves by brewing, a rare lifeline in a male-dominated world. But not all tales end in cheer. Some tablets recount disputes where alewives were accused of subversion, harboring fugitives, refusing temple taxes, or spreading unfavorable omens. Fringe scholars have even speculated that some women used beer sales as cover for other kinds of underground networks. Information brokering, matchmaking, political whispering. Was it true? Hard to say. Historians still argue whether these accusations were grounded in fact or simply patriarchy having a meltdown. You lean back against the bench, mug in hand, as the tavern hums around you. The women move like clockwork, each one tuned into the next. There's laughter, yes, but also purpose. Every pour is precise. Every transaction logged with a stylus. This isn't just hospitality, it's sovereignty. Across the room, a man tries to argue over a token's value. The alewife raises one eyebrow. He sits down. Order restored. The firelight dances across the walls, and for a moment you can almost see it. A long line of brewers stretching back generations. Women teaching daughters, refining their craft, guarding secrets. Recipes passed not just through clay tablets, but whispered at dawn, stirred in silence, tested with tongues and time. You finish your drink and place the cup carefully down. No tip jar here. Just a nod. She returns it, just once, and that's all the receipt you'll ever need. As you step back into the cooling night, you realize you've seen something rare. Not just history, but legacy. Not just beer, but the hands that shaped it. Measured, brewed, poured, and passed it down. And somewhere, under a moonlit sky, Ninkasi smiles again. You're walking again. Slower now, with that warm, barley-induced buzz that makes even cracked mud brick walls look poetic. The skies deep into navy, and torchlight flickers along the canals like fireflies having an existential crisis. You pass rows of houses with reed blinds pulled shut and soft laughter leaking through slats. Then, as you round a corner, you spot something less cozy. A guard station, and next to it, a barrel-sized ledger stone. Welcome to the bureaucratic hangover, state-regulated beer control. You squint at the inscription, carved with all the enthusiasm of a tax auditor at closing time. It lists barley quantities, brewing yields, tavern production quotas, and... Wait, is that a tax bracket for mid-strength beer? Yes. Yes, it is. This is where the ancient buzz meets ancient bureaucracy. Because once the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Really, anyone who ruled this river-soaked land realized just how important beer was. They did what any smart ruling class does. They taxed it. Hard. Beer wasn't just a drink. It was a resource, a currency, a tool of state power. And you can bet your last sila that every mug, jug, and jug of mugs got counted, weighed, and taxed down to the last barley husk. You follow a canal-side path to what looks like a small shipping depot. Workers haul sacks of grain into shaded storehouses, where government scribes with smug expressions and very good posture sit behind clay desks. One is carving numbers into a tablet faster than your brain can process. This, my friend, is where your buzz gets itemized. Rations, quotas, licenses, it's all regulated. If you're a brewer, you owe grain to the temple. If you're a tavern keeper, you owe beer to the palace. If you're caught selling without a license, congratulations, you've just committed a felony, and your punishment involves fines, loss of property, or, if you're particularly unlucky, execution by drowning. And you thought your local zoning office was rough. The Code of Hammurabi shows up again here like the killjoy it sometimes was. Law 109. If a woman tavern keeper does not arrest plotters in her house and bring them to court, she shall be put to death. Yes, apparently the state also expected you to run your tavern and act as an informant. No pressure. Historians still argue whether these harsh laws were commonly enforced or mostly symbolic, a kind of scarecrow justice meant to keep people in line. Some tablets suggest enforcement was inconsistent. Others record surprisingly meticulous inspections of taverns and brewing sites. Either way, the message was clear. The state was watching your cup. You step into a government-run brewery, larger, colder, more serious than the women-run tavern you just left. There's no laughing here. Just workers pouring grain into massive vats, steam hissing as clay pots are lifted and shifted with mechanical precision. Overseers bark orders. A clerk stands by with a stylus so sharp it could double as a punishment device.
These were the institutional breweries, often run by temples or palaces, staffed by laborers and slaves, and designed to fuel entire economies. Beer from these sites didn't go to partygoers. It went to soldiers, canal diggers, priests, and bureaucrats. It was industrial, standardized, almost clinical. And guess what? It worked. These operations were efficient enough to sustain massive workforces. Some records show tens of thousands of liters of beer being produced per month. You feel a little bad for the guy cleaning out the bottom of those vats. Fringe theories suggest those workers may have used leftover mash as bread starter or even fuel, but the evidence is mushy. Literally. You step outside and catch a breath of cooler air. Across the canal, a tax officer counts inventory with the haunted eyes of a man who's memorized too many grain-to-beer conversion rates. Someone tosses him a small clay token. Payment for a tax exemption, maybe. You swear he pockets it a little too fast. Even in 2000 BCE, corruption knew how to party. But here's the twist. This oppressive-sounding beer economy also had its perks. By distributing beer as pay, the state stabilized food supplies, kept workers fed and slightly sedated, and created a trackable, manageable economy. In a world without spreadsheets or Venmo, beer was your paycheck and your food delivery in one sloshing jug. And here's a delicious irony. While beer flowed freely, water didn't. Rivers were dirty, unpredictable, and often fatal to drink untreated. Beer, on the other hand, was boiled, slightly, fermented, and, by accident or genius, safer than your average cup of Tigris tap. So in regulating it, the state was also controlling public health, just with clay mugs and a divine song. You pause beside a small shrine near the depot gate. A tiny altar with an offering bowl, half filled with beer. There's a reed flower next to it and a token stamped with the sign for blessing. Someone clearly thought they'd need divine help getting through a tax audit. You smile, because honestly, same. A cat weaves around your ankles, purring like it knows your secrets. You sip from the communal jug beside the altar, lukewarm, earthy, not great. Government brew. Predictable, but not terrible. And in that moment, it hits you. The system works. Not perfectly, not kindly, but consistently. It fuels armies, funds temples, and keeps taverns open. The whole sprawling machine of Mesopotamian civilization, ziggurats, empires, wars, myths, it's all just barley, water, yeast, and rules. You sit on the canal edge as the moon rises. Behind you, bureaucrats light their final lamps. Ahead, boats drift past with crates of clay jugs, headed downstream to other cities, other drinkers, other lives. And you? You're starting to feel like you understand this world. One sip at a time.
The moon's higher now, lazy and full, casting just enough silver light to make the canal glisten like it's wearing lip gloss. You're walking again, this time toward the edge of the city, where the mud brick gives way to tilled soil and sleepy reed huts. It's quieter here. You hear frogs, a distant owl, and then laughter. You duck under a low arch and enter what feels like a beer garden, Mesopotamian style. It's less of a garden, more of a courtyard with baskets for seats and a makeshift table carved from old bricks. A jug of beer sits in the middle, surrounded by half a dozen people. Farmers, a fisherman, someone who probably wrestles goats for a living. They wave you over, and just like that, you're part of the gang. Here's what you need to know. Beer wasn't only for festivals or temples or taxes. It was social glue. A way to bond, tell stories, settle arguments, and gossip like there's no ziggurat watching. And the further you get from the city center, the more honest it feels. One man slaps his knee mid-story. You catch the word inanna, and suddenly you're getting the Mesopotamian equivalent of a drunken myth retelling. According to him, Inanna once challenged her father Enki to a drinking contest, won, and walked home with all of civilization's powers in her back pocket. Is it historically accurate? No. Is it deeply funny and strangely empowering? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether beer's social role surpassed its nutritional value. Some say it was a survival tool first, social lubricant second. Others insist that these shared evenings, these communal rituals of sipping and storytelling, were the real backbone of Mesopotamian society. Food you ate alone. Beer, that you shared. You take a sip from a communal straw and pass it to the left. No mugs here, just a large pot in the center and long, bendy straws made of reed or bronze. You wonder how many lips have touched this one today, and then you decide not to think about it. The conversation shifts from myths to daily gripes. Canal floods, the price of dates, that one merchant who shorted everyone on fish this week. It's mundane, but that's the point. This is the pulse of ancient life, not battles or kings, not temple ceremonies, just people, half-drunk and wholly human, unwinding after another blisteringly normal day. And every so often, the stories turn darker. Not scary, just real. A woman speaks of her son, conscripted by a local warlord. A man jokes, softly, about hiding some of his barley from inspectors. Another mutters something about the tax tablet accidentally falling into the canal. The group laughs, but not too loudly. You realize now, beer isn't just pleasure, it's privacy. Not in the hidden sense, but in the safe space sense. Here, with friends and ale, people can speak a little more freely. The state has
one man sighs that he'll never impress the brewer's daughter, not with his barley ration. They all groan. Someone offers him a toasted reed cake as consolation. The moment is warm, small, perfect. And here's a beautiful historical footnote. Love poems from this era often mention beer. In some, the beloved is described as more intoxicating than the finest brew. In others, the couple meets in a tavern. In one eyebrow-raising verse, a woman invites her lover to drink the beer from my cup, my sweet. We'll just leave that there. It makes sense. If you wanted to court someone, you didn't take them for a walk by the canals. You shared a jug. Beer was courtship, comfort, and courage. The original wingman. Fringe scholars have even proposed that some taverns acted as proto-dating spaces, where people met and flirted, especially during festivals. One early Akkadian phrase, crudely translated, might mean barley before marriage, though others argue it was just a pun about soggy bread. Academic debates are thrilling. You take another sip. This one tastes slightly different, more date than grain, sweeter, like someone added a splash of syrup. You point, curious, and someone shrugs. Leftover from New Year's, he says. Ah yes, Akitu, the New Year festival. It was when beer flowed freely, temples through wild rituals, and kings participated in symbolic sacrifices and possibly some extremely awkward roleplay involving gods and fertility rites. You try not to picture that in high definition. One of the group's older women sighs and begins to hum an old drinking song. The others slowly join in, and even if the lyrics are nonsense to your ears, the rhythm makes sense. You close your eyes and let the chant swirl around you. The fire crackles low. Someone dozes off with a mug still in hand. The air smells of ash, dates, and damp barley. The moon casts sleepy shadows on the stone path outside. And for a second, just a second, you forget the century. You forget the rules, the ration lists, the laws written in sharp clay. You're just a human, sipping the same drink your ancestors shared before history even realized it was being written. You raise your cup quietly to nothing and everything, and sip again.
The stars have turned, just slightly, enough that you can feel the tilt of time. The courtyard behind you hums with the fading energy of a night well lived, and you're wandering again. This time, the path takes you deeper into the domestic heart of Mesopotamia. No taverns, no temples, just homes. Mud brick, low-roofed, built close to keep out heat and keep in gossip. You duck into a small doorway where light spills onto the street from a flickering oil lamp. The interior is simple. Woven mats on the floor, clay pots lining one wall, a sleeping baby swaddled in linen. And in the corner, a woman stirring something thick and bubbling in a broad-mouthed jar. It smells like sour grain and dates. Congratulations, you've made it to the kitchen. And yes, beer is here too. Because as much as the temples like to hoard the prestige of brewing, the real backbone of Mesopotamian beer was found in the home. Brewing wasn't just a profession. It was daily survival. People didn't buy six-packs. They made small batches in clay pots, stored in shaded corners, stirred with long reeds and fermented with natural yeast floating in the air like tiny drunk angels. You settle into a corner as the woman's daughter begins to grind malted grain with a stone. It's rhythmic, meditative. The sound alone could lull you to sleep if the smell didn't make your stomach rumble like a camel with attitude. Here's a beautiful, everyday truth. Beer was food. It was thick, nutritious, and packed with calories. Often called liquid bread, it served as both drink and sustenance. Especially for the poor, who couldn't always afford meat, beer was a vital part of the diet. Even kids drank it, albeit a much weaker version. Historians still argue whether the home brew was always alcoholic, or sometimes more like a barley smoothie. Some tablets distinguish between cash, beer, and cash cig, clear beer, while others lump all grain drinks under one term. It's confusing. Welcome to ancient menus. The woman lifts the lid off another pot, revealing a layer of foam. She grins and offers you a sip. It's warm, tart, and grainy, like drinking a bowl of sour oatmeal through a straw. Honestly, not bad.
You watch her work and realize this is chemistry, craft, quiet science passed through generations. No thermometer, no timer, no Google. Just instinct, tradition, and a lot of trial and error. And if you messed it up, you didn't waste a drink. You wasted your dinner. Fun fact, many home recipes included bapir, that twice-baked barley bread you heard about back at the temple. Households would bake it in bulk, store it for weeks, and mash it up when it was time to brew. Some reenactment. It's just dinner being made, stories being shared, kids being kids. One elder sits near the doorway, cradling a jug. He offers it to you with a tired but kind nod. You take a sip. It's different again. Darker, smokier, maybe fermented longer. You ask if they used temple yeast. He laughs. Temple yeast? I have my own. Been using the same starter for 30 years. That hits differently. This isn't just fermentation. It's memory, passed down in bubbles and tang. Each batch a little story, a little survival. In the corner, the daughter begins shaping beer loaves, thick barley buns with a hole in the center, designed to dry fast and break apart easily during brewing. She hums a tune. You don't recognize it, but it feels ancient. Something about grain and sweetness and protection from bad spirits. Because yes, superstition surrounded homebrewing too. Some believed that whispering certain words during fermentation would ensure a good batch. Others left charms near the brew to ward off mold or mischief. And if a batch went sour, blame the spirits. Or the neighbor. Definitely not your technique. You sip again, savoring the strange comfort of this homebrew. It tastes like chores and patience, like bruised fingers and borrowed recipes, like everything that's not written on a temple tablet, but kept alive in hearts and hands. A small boy crawls into your lap. You offer him the last sip of your cup, and he shakes his head with a mischievous smile. Too bitter, he says. He's got time. And now you realize you've seen every corner of the beer map. Festival, temple, tavern, office, and home. And yet somehow, this humble room might be the most sacred of all. Because here, beer isn't godly, or regulated, or mythologized. It's just life. Warm. Necessary. Shared. And somehow, still bubbling. Morning again, but not yours. This sunrise belongs to a caravan just now trundling out of the city gate, wheels creaking under clay jars sealed tight with woven reeds. You follow it, not on foot this time, but in imagination. The kind of travel you do lying flat, hands behind your head, brain slightly fizzy with barley afterglow. You're heading out into Mesopotamia's beer trade network, because, surprise, this stuff wasn't just consumed locally. It moved across deserts and rivers, from palace to palace, from one pantheon's fanboys to another's. As the caravan winds east toward Elam, or west toward Mari, you realize something weird. Beer wasn't always shipped as beer. That stuff spoils fast in the sun, and sloshing it around in breakable pots wasn't ideal. Instead, brewers packed the key ingredients, bapir, malted grain, sweeteners, so that beer could be reconstituted later, like the world's oldest instant soup, but with more hallucinations and fewer noodles. You're bouncing along with the donkeys now, passing through checkpoints where scribes inspect tokens and seals. Each jar is marked with an insignia, the brewer's name, the temple of origin, and sometimes even the style. This wasn't just logistics, it was branding. Archaeologists have found dozens of these storage jar seals, tiny, gorgeous clay discs stamped with emblems like barley stalks, starbursts, or divine symbols. And if you're thinking, wait, ancient Mesopotamians had craft labels? You're absolutely right.
One recovered seal even had a slogan of sorts. Scholars argue over the exact translation, but it might have read, "From the house of Ninkasi, sweet and clear," which is basically a 3000 BCE version of "brewed with love since forever." At distant market towns, the beer supplies are met with excitement. It's not just a commodity, it's a treat. Some merchants use it to grease deals, others trade it for spices or copper. In one town, a brewer's special honey bapir blend is accepted in place of currency for 2 weeks straight. You imagine the brewer smugly updating her clay ledger, surrounded by slightly tipsy accountants. And this wasn't just a merchant hustle. It was state diplomacy. Some kings sent beer as tribute, others demanded it. One early Assyrian ruler reportedly requested 12 jars of northern brew from a city under his control. Historians still argue whether this was for a festival or just a royal binge session. Either way, it's clear. Beer had gone international. You pause the imaginary donkey ride and think bigger. Imagine a foreign envoy arriving in Ur, bearing gifts of cedar and ivory, only to be met with a beer feast. Toasts are made, gods are invoked, deals are whispered behind jugs. The beer does what beer always does: softens egos, loosens tongues, and makes even the grumpiest negotiator nod and say, "Sure, take the copper."
Symbolize the start of peaceful relations.
While evidence is mostly poetic, it lines up with the role beer played everywhere else: a bridge between power and pleasure. You shift the dream channel again, this time to a riverside port. Massive reed rafts drift in, weighted with cargo. Dockworkers unload barrels, and somewhere in the noise, you hear a familiar sound: the slosh of beer being ladled into travel mugs. Yes, even long-haul traders needed their fix, probably even more than the average bricklayer. But here's the fun twist. Not all traded beer was top shelf. Like today, some brews had reputations. There are tablets that record disputes over spoiled beer, watered-down shipments, and even deliberate counterfeits. One angry scribe describes a batch from Kish as flat, thin, and unworthy of even a dog's bowl, which is both insulting and oddly poetic. To prevent such issues, temples and palaces started standardizing recipes, issuing brewing protocols to ensure consistent quality. This was the start of something huge: institutional quality control. Somewhere in a dusty archive, a royal clerk probably muttered, "We need better foam metrics." And the world of regulation was never the same. You lean back in your imagined saddle and watch the trade routes stretch outward, like veins from a heart. Beer travels by raft, donkey, boat, and occasionally on foot, slung over someone's shoulder in a leather bag that probably smells like death and barley. And the reach is stunning. From Sumer to Akkad, from Elam to the Levant, this sticky, frothy drink flows across borders. Not always in physical form, sometimes as recipes, rituals, or even jokes. Because if there's one thing even a foreign dignitary could understand, it's a good beer pun. Trust us, sip to forget your tax list works in any language. You return mentally to the city gates, watching the caravan vanish into the shimmering distance. The beer it carries might be drunk in a feast, used as a bribe, given as tribute, or just sipped quietly beside a fire, while someone wonders what their life would have been if they'd just learned pottery instead. And that's the thing. Beer wasn't just central to Mesopotamian life. It was the medium through which that life traveled. A physical thing, yes, but also a symbol, a promise, a whisper of connection between cities that might never meet and people who'll never share a meal, except through a shared taste. You lift an imaginary jug, toast the road ahead, and whisper, "To the next city."
You're walking along the canal again, but something's changed. The streets are quieter, the air thicker, like the city is holding its breath. You drift past shuttered market stalls, through alleyways littered with half-broken jugs and stray reeds. A storm's coming, not of weather, but of time. Because now you're entering a more fragile part of the story, the part where empires crack, languages drift, and beer, our ever-loyal drink, starts to slip from the hands of temples and taverns into something more chaotic. This is the decline. Not the fall of beer. Please, don't panic. Beer survives. It always survives. But you can feel the shift here, like the way your favorite bar starts playing top 40 hits and replacing the good mugs with plastic ones. The great seas of Mesopotamia, Ur, Uruk, Babylon, start losing their edge. Trade routes falter, rivers shift course, invasions come in waves. Gutians, Elamites, Hittites. Each new conqueror brings new gods, new laws, new drinking habits. Some still love beer. Others, brace yourself, prefer wine. You shiver, not because wine is bad, but because it changes things. Wine demands grapes. Grapes demand hills. And hills? Not exactly Mesopotamia's specialty. Still, new rulers like the Kassites and Assyrians begin importing wine from the mountains and offering it in ceremonies. In elite circles, beer starts to lose its divine edge. It becomes common. You pause beside a half-cracked relief carved into a temple wall. It shows two men pouring from jars, one labeled beer, the other wine. The beer guy looks slightly grumpy. You feel that. But beer isn't gone, not even close. It just moves downstream, into the hands of laborers, housewives, farmers, and anyone who doesn't care about status symbols. In some ways, it becomes more real, less about rituals, more about resilience. Inside a fading tavern, you watch an old brewer scrape the bottom of a cracked vat. She's working with less now, less barley, less sweetness, less certainty. But she brews anyway. Her customers don't toast to gods anymore. They drink to surviving the next tax hike, or the next war. Historians still argue whether this period marks a true decline in beer culture, or just a transformation. Some tablets show continued brewing across centuries. Others go silent. The archaeological record thins, clay breaks, names blur. But what we do know is this: beer never vanishes. It changes shape, like river water diverted by stone. It flows around disruption, down into the cracks. You cross a crumbling bridge into Babylon. The ziggurat still towers, but it's quiet now, watched over by
Kings forget what barley looks like. And yet, amid the ruins, you hear laughter. Not loud, just a handful of workers resting by the river. One holds a jug. They're passing it around, making jokes about the overseer's sandals. The taste? Probably thin, barely fermented. But it still brings them together. You join them, not because you're thirsty, but because you need to feel that tether, that human thing that doesn't depend on dynasties or temple protocols. One man raises his jug and says something simple, something that doesn't need translation. To tomorrow, may it not suck. Cheers. You sip, and in that moment, you understand. Beer isn't a monument. It's a ritual in motion, a habit that survives collapse by ducking under the radar. Empires may fall, but the instinct to gather, to share, to sip and sigh and soften, that's permanent. And so it goes. The cities fade, the temples change hands, new languages are carved into new tablets. But somewhere, someone is still stirring a pot of barley and hoping it doesn't turn sour. A whisper through time, a foam line across history, a taste that remembers what the stone forgets.
You're walking through dust now, ankle-deep, sun-hot, whispering of stories half-lost. The cities have crumbled, their ziggurats little more than hunched silhouettes against the sky. But you're not done, not even close, because this isn't just the end of Mesopotamia. This is the start of its legacy. The flavors, the rituals, the habits, it all flows outward now, braided into new cultures, new tongues. You're following beer as it evolves. First up, the neighbors. To the west, Egypt picks up the barley torch with its own flair, sweeter brews, sometimes flavored with mandrake or carob. The Egyptians love beer so much that pharaohs are buried with it. Workers at Giza are paid in it, and the goddess Hathor, their answer to Ninkasi, gets so drunk in one myth that she forgets to destroy humanity. A classic. You sip that version, slightly floral, a bit grassy, and it feels familiar. Different song, same rhythm. Beer flows further. The Hittites in Anatolia, the Persians under Cyrus, even the Greeks, who famously called beer barley wine and considered it a bit barbaric. And the Romans? Oh, they'll drink it, but only on the edges of the empire, where vineyards won't grow and soldiers get homesick. You pause beside a crumbling column where someone once scratched, "Bad beer here," in cuneiform's grandchild, Aramaic. The insult lives on. And here's the kicker. Modern beer history doesn't erase Mesopotamia. It owes everything to it. The ingredients, the process, the idea that grain plus water plus time equals joy. That starts with your Mesopotamian brewmaster stirring a clay pot 6,000 years ago and hoping the gods don't curse the foam. Historians still argue whether beer diffused slowly via trade or sprang up independently in different regions. But what's undeniable is that this land, the Tigris-Euphrates Basin, was one of its oldest, most important wombs, a motherland of malt. You duck into a shadowed archive, one of the last standing in a ruined palace. The walls are lined with clay tablets stacked like dusty novels. A scribe's skeleton slumps near a shelf. His last note, still readable, records barley rations for temple staff, right next to a recipe with a cute little doodle of a jug. You swear the jug has eyes. Fringe scholars sometimes speculate, did beer help write? Not literally, but symbolically? Think about it. To track brewing, you needed tablets. You needed literacy. And once that door opened, bam, administration, math, poetry, science. In a roundabout way, you're sipping from the font of civilization itself. Outside, you hear children laughing. Not from the past, not echoes. Real children, today, somewhere nearby. You peek through the wall. An archaeological dig in progress. Bright orange vests, dust-covered notebooks. A researcher kneels and gently lifts a pot fragment from the ground. Her eyes widen. It's from the early Uruk period, part of a beer vessel, still faintly stained inside. And now you're drifting, time unspooling like thread from a spindle.
You're at a craft brewery in Berlin, a roadside dive in Tehran, a tiny rooftop bar in Tokyo. The names change. The grains shift. Rice, rye, wheat. But the bones? Still barley. Still yeast. Still fermentation. Still community. You sit in a dim room with neon lighting and minimalist decor. A server brings a flight of beers on a wooden tray, each one inspired by ancient recipes. One with honey, one sour, one spiced with herbs that probably once grew near the Euphrates. You sip and it hits. They're trying to remember, to revive, to connect. Because even now, in the digital haze of the 21st century, beer is still ritual. The happy hour? An echo of temple offerings. The clink of glasses? A shadow of clay mugs passed hand to hand. The tipsy debates and soft, slurred poetry? Just modern versions of what those Sumerian night owls once murmured by torchlight. You realize now that the story hasn't ended. It's disguised. It's passed from pot to pint, from myth to meme. And as long as someone lifts a cup, not to escape, but to feel closer, Mesopotamia still lives. You exhale. The past settles around you like warm sand. Not heavy, not sad, just grounding. And somewhere, in the folds of time, Ninkasi toasts you back. You're not walking anymore. You're reclining, on a worn-out mat, in the shadow of a fig tree, with your hands behind your head and a belly full of stories. The Mesopotamian sun has dipped below the horizon again, and everything is cast in soft bronze. But just when you think the journey's slowing down, something unexpected floats your way. A song. Not sung aloud, but remembered. It starts gently, like a breeze through barley stalks. The rhythm is familiar now. You've heard parts of it whispered at temple altars, muttered by tavern keepers, and hummed by old women beside the brewing pots. It's the hymn to Ninkasi, one of the oldest surviving beer recipes, and yes, it's literally a song. You hear the opening lines in your mind. Ninkasi, you are the one who waters the malt set on the ground. And suddenly, you're back in that temple courtyard,
watching women grind grain in the morning light. Except now, you see the ritual in a new way. This wasn't just prep, it was performance. Brewing was sacred, and like all sacred things in ancient Mesopotamia, it came with music. You sip an imaginary cup and hum along. The hymn goes on, describing every step: malting, mashing, filtering, fermenting, all framed as acts of praise to the goddess. Scholars still debate whether the hymn was practical instruction or poetic devotion. Maybe both. Maybe it was easier to remember a recipe when it rhymed. Maybe it was safer to encode science in worship, so no one dared mess it up. And here's the wild part. This isn't just the oldest beer recipe. It's arguably the earliest example of written instructions for anything. While others were scribbling about land ownership and goat counts, someone somewhere said, "Hold on, let's write down how to brew a proper pint." Priorities. We respect them. You follow the imagined music into a more vivid memory, a festival scene. The temple is bustling. Baphair loaves are stacked like bricks, great vats are bubbling, priests are chanting, children are dancing, and the brew flows like a second river. This is Ninkasi's day, and everyone's a little too cheerful for a society that punishes tavern cheats with drowning. And yet, no violence here, just joy. You hear someone shout, "May your cup never run dry," and it lands deep. Because in this moment, beer isn't just sustenance or economy or control, it's grace. You think about other drinking songs across time: Viking mead hymns, medieval English tavern ballads, Irish rebel songs, even frat chants, let's not linger. They all do what the hymn to Ninkasi does: turn drink into meaning, structure into ritual, a simple act, sip, into something layered, textured, human. The hymn closes with, "It is you who hold with both hands the great sweet beer, brewing it with honey and pouring it in joy." And for a second, you feel it. Not nostalgia, lineage. Like a thread has been tied to your wrist, pulled from a temple courtyard 4,000 years ago and still tugging gently every time you raise a glass.
You whisper a toast under your breath, though you're not sure who it's to anymore. Ninkasi, the nameless brewers, yourself? Maybe all of it. Historians still argue whether the hymn was widely sung or reserved for special days. But you know this. Someone memorized it. Someone passed it down. Someone sang it to their kids while stirring the pot, hoping the yeast would behave. And that's how knowledge travels. Not always in books, sometimes in rhythm, in steam, in repetition. You look at your hands. Not covered in grain or ink, but the gesture's still there. Fingers curled around an imaginary cup, warm and full. You stand and stretch. Around you, the dream city flickers. Temples, taverns, fields, they shimmer like heat haze. But the hymn stays, and now you hum it too. Not to remember the process, but to remember them. The people who drank before battle, before taxes, before they got married. The people who sang while they brewed, laughed while they sipped, and found meaning in a fermented miracle. The people who whispered to Ninkasi, not for wealth or power or safety, just for one more perfect cup. You raise it, quietly, to them, to her, to the rhythm that never really stopped. Now you're drifting through a space not bound by place anymore. No temples, no courtyards, no dusty ziggurat skyline, just memory, just echoes. The past has peeled back its layers for you, and what's left isn't architecture or artifacts, it's rhythm. And at the center of that rhythm, the pulse of everyday people. So tonight, let's lean into them. Not kings, not gods, not scribes writing laws with sticks and pride, but the anonymous drinkers, the ones who left behind fingerprints, not names, who drank beer not to change the world, but to cope with it. You find yourself in the cool shadow of a small reed shack on the city's edge. A man squats in the dirt, elbows on his knees, cup in hand. He nods at you. You sit beside him. No introductions. You both know the rules. He's tired, bones tired.
the kind that seeps from canal digging and barley hauling and debt that outlives the harvest. He sips, offers you some. It's sour, slightly burned, but hey, it's wet. He doesn't speak much, but after a while, he mumbles, "My son wants to be a priest." I told him, brew first, preach later. Then he laughs, raspy and real. That's the thing about this drink. It lives in the in-between, between work and rest, between silence and song, between one lifetime and the next. You remember now the labor tablets, the ones listing beer rations for workers, 1 jug per day for brickmakers, 2 for soldiers, half a jug for canal dredgers, not as a treat, not as payment, as fuel. You worked, you drank, you survived. Historians still argue whether that daily beer was truly nutritious or just numbing, whether it kept workers healthy or simply sedated. Either way, it kept them going, and it was equalizing in a way. The rich had wine, the poor had beer, but nobody drank water, nobody trusted water. Beer was reliable, tested, and, thanks to fermentation, safer. It was your hydration, your calories, your low-level buzz. It was the taste of survival. You leave the man in the shadows and wander to another fire. A group of women, some mothers, some grandmothers, sit in a circle, each with a clay cup. One spins yarn while another hums, off-key but confident. You crouch down. No one says anything, but someone nudges a jug toward you. You pour. And then one of them starts telling a story, not a myth, just something that happened. A neighbor who fell in the canal. A priest who bought spoiled grain and blamed the rats. A girl who tricked a tax collector by brewing fake beer with river foam. They all laugh. It's beautiful, and mundane, and ancient. And now, you realize you've been drinking like this your whole life, just in different containers, in different languages. The setting changes, the laws change, but this moment, this human, small, heart-soft moment.
The stars are out, crisp and scattered like someone spilled a jar of barley across black silk. And for the first time in this whole journey, you feel it slow down. Not stop, just settle. You're not in a city anymore, or a ruin, or a dream. You're in the space between breaths, where memory curls like smoke and time forgets to tick. A space where people drink because they're tired, because they're hopeful, because the day ended and they're still here. This is not the end of civilization. This is the continuity of it. In a sip, in a sigh, in a story murmured low beside a fire. So you pour one more cup, not for thirst, not even for taste, but because it feels right. And you whisper, not to anyone in particular, to those who drank before me and those who will after. Then you sip, and everything gets quiet. You're lying back now, toes barely grazing the cool edge of a clay basin, listening to a frog somewhere belch out its personal opera. The last embers of the fire are glowing like tiny suns in a bed of ash. Everything in your body says, stay. Don't move. Don't blink too hard. Because you've arrived at the stillest part of the journey. The part where history doesn't just inform you, it inhabits you. Let it. Let the barley fields return in a breeze that rustles your hair. Let the hiss of boiling mash echo faintly from some distant kitchen. Let the slosh of half-ladled beer in a temple courtyard still shimmer behind your eyelids. This is where the story doesn't stop. It settles. Right now, in your half-sleep haze, you realize what we've been doing all along wasn't just about beer. It was about what beer made possible. Connection. Memory. A kind of fragile, fizzy resilience. A drink brewed by hand, passed lip to lip, carrying something unspoken that was somehow more permanent than laws or kings.
There's a version of you now sitting at every fire we visited. One of you is still watching the brewers at the temple pour honey into a great vat, the steam blurring your vision. One of you is still in that courtyard bar, laughing at a joke you didn't understand, your belly warm. Another one is kneeling beside an old pot, wondering if you can smell the history in the foam. And somewhere, maybe right now, maybe long after you've gone, someone else is sipping from a mug and wondering, how long have we been doing this? The answer? Forever. Because beer wasn't invented in a flash. It emerged in small, sticky gestures. Crushed grain, saved mash, shared pot. 1,000 tiny decisions over centuries of trial, error, and hope. Until someone looked at their bubbling jar and said, "This is good." It's the comfort of pattern, the soft fizz of tradition, the joy of making something last, if only from one night to the next. Historians still argue whether beer was civilization's spark or just a happy accident, whether agriculture began with bread or with brew. But they all agree, it changed us. It slowed us down, rooted us, gave us reasons to stay close, to share, to build. It gave us rituals and recipes, love poems and work songs, debts and feasts, excuses and apologies. It gave us narrative. You curl your fingers around an invisible cup. So now, let yourself settle. Let the air in your room grow still. Let the shapes of the night soften around you. If there's a fan spinning nearby, listen to it. Let it blend with the imagined hiss of ancient kettles, the splash of water on grain, the quiet laughter echoing across millennia. You've wandered through mud-brick alleys, ducked into brew houses, leaned over temple vats, and whispered to forgotten gods. You've seen how something as simple as soaked barley could spiral into a ritual, a recipe, a rhythm of human life. And maybe now your eyes are getting heavier. Let them. Let your breath slow. Let your chest rise gently, like the surface of a fermenting pot. Let your thoughts bubble once, then settle, clear. There's nothing else to remember tonight. Nothing you have to do. Just this slow fade backward. Into warm soil, golden liquid, cool clay. Into the memory of people long gone who still feel, somehow, nearby. You're not in a bedroom anymore. You're in a memory bigger than you. A memory kept alive not in stone or scroll, but in cups raised beside fires, in sighs at the end of long days, in shared moments that mattered because they were together. So here's your last sip. Here's your last thought. You are part of the oldest tradition. And tonight, you rest with all the others who ever lifted a cup, took a breath, and closed their eyes. Sleep well, brewer. Sleep well, drinker. Sleep well, keeper of the flame.